All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the May 20th edition of the DAACAT. I'm Dustin Renner, technical agronomist, North Central, Northwest Iowa, with my counterparts, Jim McDermott, just a little bit south, right down the street from me, and then Nora Schultz, kind of in our southern territory. So go ahead and get started. Here's the agenda for this morning. Like always, we'll start off with a trivia question. Go through some stand assessments. We've had some hail in the area. What do we need to look at and how do we assess that? Obviously, with the heat last week as well, we've seen this corn really start to pop in some areas, and we're not too far away from post-corn application. Some things to keep in mind, especially some concerning things. I had some with conversations with growers yesterday that we want to hit on. Early fungicide applications, and then we have our spotlight product. So that would be the agenda for this morning. And we will start off with a trivia question. What do herbicide safeners do inside corn plants when you spray them? And for a bonus, what is the safener in Diflex called?
Putting them to the test this morning, Dustin.
We'll see if somebody gets the bonus question. I'll be impressed.
I don't know. David's on here. He's our streak winner.
Safeners put up little shields inside the corn plant, don't they?
That's right. 5, 4, 3, 2.
Oh, we got some.
We got a couple.
Yep.
We got any right ones? I cannot see. I'm only on one screen this morning because I'm a little mobile, so
yeah,
I don't
there.
have my 3
I got
screen
it now.
setups.
Yep. I think we've got one that is close enough. Yes, by Kaya again.
Jeez, 3-time champion. So yeah, it helps the corn plant metabolize that herbicide quicker by producing enzymes to break down that herbicide. So it metabolizes it before it can cause damage. And the bonus for the safener that is in Diflex, that is the greatest safener on the market, cyprosulfamide. So you're going to have foliar and root safening activity with that safener that's in Diflex. So thank you for the participation. And Jim, if you want to take it over for the next couple.
Yeah, you bet. We are talking GDUs, and for those of you that weren't on earlier, we always have records. Try to be broke, or maybe you don't want to be the winner in this one, but post the lowest overnight temperature that you had. Here at Spencer, I had 32 that I saw as a low at about 6 o'clock. But go ahead and post in the chat what you had for a low. Hopefully, we'll talk about this a little bit later. Hopefully, we're not dealing too much with frost damage. So as far as GDU accumulation, use Sac City, basically our research station for this week's GDUs. And, it's been this trend, and that 11th or the early planting window has consistently been running ahead. In some cases, 100 to even 125. So we're slipping a little bit, but still 80 ahead for the 11th of April planting date. For the 22nd, which would have been that Wednesday, happened to be about an 80-degree day, still running slightly ahead. And then as we get to the 5th, once we got into that week after most areas got rain, we're pretty much right on par. In fact, we had been behind the long-term average. This would be the 30-year average from that 4th, 5th week of planting. So bring this up because, really like last week, once we got into the planting dates of the 24th and 25th, there were a lot of locations that didn't have enough GDUs accumulated to even see emergence. And that was critical because those planting dates, at least for a lot of the area that I cover, the western half of Northwest Iowa, those were some of the tougher planting dates, that 24th and 25th. A lot of that was done right before the rain and didn't have a chance to really get started. And so it was working against the crust more so than other areas. So GDU accumulation was a little bit slower because it missed out on some of that heat that we had the week of the 20th, 22nd, right in there. And then it also didn't get a chance to get started before that sealed over. And, some areas had some really severe crust. Some areas it was just a mild crust. But I think what worked against those planting dates was the fact that ground was sealed over. We didn't get a lot of oxygen to the seed, so not only did it not have the heat to get started, it didn't have a lot of oxygen. So it sat there and didn't do much. So really was just starting to emerge as of last Tuesday and Wednesday here a week. All when we were looking at stands last week, evaluating a lot of stands, and quite a few of them planted in that 24th, 25th, were battling a little bit more of the crust. Jumping into stand evaluations. So, like I mentioned, last week was a critical week for deciding on replanting, mostly from crusting, but there are some other things going on. Not a lot of areas are wet now. So by the time we get in, of course, we're into that 15th to 25th window of May right now. I look at this chart and you see 87% is maybe the max yield from the planting dates that we're at now. To me, I think these charts are a little bit dated. Modern hybrids probably have a way of being able to make up for some later planting dates, and most likely we're a little higher than 87% maximum yield, say if we're planting 20th, 25th of May. But still, as you compare that to the optimum window, April 20th through May 5th, we could technically be down to 20,000 and still be almost equal with that planting date that we're going to be at here. But overall, I guess I look at that 20 to 23,000 as a threshold for replanting. Obviously, a lot of factors go into play when you're considering the hybrid yield potential, evenness of the stand, emotions of the growers, all those things that we all know. But roughly threshold for corn, that's where I would be at. And jumping on to the topic of maturities, I think Nora brought this up even, heck, feels like a month ago, but 2 to 3 weeks ago in some of those areas in central Iowa that didn't get planted very timely. But, now that we know we're going to have some replants, either from hail or some drowned outs, washouts coming out of the rain event that we had over the weekend, definitely a question now about, are we needing to switch? And usually you think about that May 20th as a point where we want to start looking at changing our maturities. The key thing is, of course, is even if we're changing maturities, we're just not jumping to a drastically early hybrid for northern Iowa. Really that means just earlying it up 2 to 3 days, and we're still in a sweet spot for 107, 110 day products, depending on the end use. And that's a key factor. Those products are more adapted, better stress tolerance, better standability generally than those products that are not normally planted in a given area, especially if we're jumping down to sub 100 day products. So keep that in mind as we're coming back in on replanting in some of these scenarios that we don't need to jump drastically at all in the maturity. And then on soybeans, coming off, potentially if we had some frost last night, I think by my counts, this is the 7th time since the growing season has started that we've been in either a frost advisory or a freeze warning. So we've had a number of opportunities for these soybeans to be nipped. Plus you throw in some of the hail, some of the crusting. There has been some replanting on soybeans. Obviously, we know we can have that staggered emergence on soybeans and still not drastically affect yield. Most situations I'm using 80, 75,000 as a cutoff on their overall stands. Again, a lot of factors go into that. I know some fields that did get replanted, maybe with an additional 80,000 because of frost from some April 8th to 10th plantings. But in a lot of cases, you'd have a good stand in a pocket of the field, but then you'd have 3-4 foot gaps just because the frost works so sporadically, and the residue was very uneven throughout the field. So, if you've got those types of gaps, which we may potentially have again from some of our hailed fields, then that really comes into the decision, is we're going to be fighting weeds if we've got those big gaps out there. And obviously, if we've got high pH soil, if we've got lighter soils, I would be replanting even at a higher threshold than 75 to 80,000. guess comments from Nora and Dustin on that topic?
I do not have anything, Jim. But to kind of lead into obviously making some stand assessments, we had a lot of hail, few storms starting Friday night across the area into throughout the weekend and Monday night. So corn should be fine. I looked at a few fields yesterday afternoon. You know, the biggest thing in corn is those tattered up leaves, and is that whirl able to push through? Some beans, I'm wondering in the area we're going to have to go out and assess that. Between the hail and then last Tuesday's dust bowl that we had some cut off. But this was a map that I took out. I want to give a shout out to this website. It's agweather.com. This is radar indicated hail, and so there is a next slide that I'll show where it'll, ground truth this. But as you can see, radar indicated hail pretty much hit a wide swath of our area with some pretty large indicated hail, radar indicated. So you can go in and click on parts of these maps to see, because it's showing radar indicated hail of over 3 inches. But as you go in, this was just east of Akron over here, and I know there was some big hail. So the max radar indicated hail is like 2.5 inches, and ground truth, we did see some on the 17th of, 1.75 inches in Plymouth County there, 3 miles southwest of Craig. So just kind of interesting map to see when you're trying to make a determination of where we could have received the most damage from hail, and locate your scouting where you need to go. So here's some pictures. I think these are from Jim a few years ago, but obviously beans more susceptible to hail this time of year. But as you look across our territory, there is a lot of beans sitting in dry dirt. Some were coming up, some had 1, 2 leaves on it of this early planted. But as long as beans still have a cotyledon, even a leaf, we have a lot of growing points across the beans that can compensate for defoliation. So you never want hail, but the good thing is how early we were this year. We should see some limited damage, but between a couple hailstorms, windstorms, we are going to have to assess some of these bean stands to see if we're going to have to do anything, slot some more in. But Jim, Nora, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, it's interesting that bullseye that you were showing in the previous slide is exactly where I'm going to be tomorrow, looking at some hailed out corn and bean. And, even with that, you always want to give 5 to 7 days rule of thumb, and, maybe not quite that long. Plus we've been cool and cloudy, so the regrowth is going to be slowed by that. So we do need to be patient. Some fields, of course, it's a pretty easy decision if it's just completely mowed off. But a lot of these beans, it's amazing what they can do to regrow, both from hail as well as frost. And then
we have some.
Go ahead, Nora.
And we have some good pictures in our newsletter. If people are confused, we've had this discussion for the last couple of weeks. We've included some pictures of the regrowth. If you're not sure if what you're looking at is regrowth or the growing points, you can refer back to the newsletters we've done where we've had some really good examples, since this has been such a recurring topic, like you've said, Jim.
Every week we're talking about frost. Yeah, and Pierce's question in the chat was a good one as far as maturity. Just in general, if I'm planting beans or replanting beans, I would not be changing maturities. Really, we've got a good 2 weeks yet before we need to do that. And then the question about patching in, if we've got a stand that's 50,000 and we want to come back in with 80,000, should we change maturities? Personally, I wouldn't. I look at the beans that are there. They're not very far along, and these beans. Again, the staggered emergence doesn't seem to hurt them, and they do seem to catch up and really grow throughout the season and mature at the same time. So I wouldn't be changing maturities myself.
So to kind of switch gears here and go into post-corn applications, obviously some of this early planted corn, and with the heat last week has really brought it along. We have some nice looking corn around the area that's getting some size V2, V3. And I just wanted to bring up, so we are on the cusp of doing some post-corn applications. And I think everybody has seen, as we walking into fields later in the season, we're starting to lose the battle against water hemp in corn. We've relied on Group 27 herbicides to do the heavy lifting on water hemp control for a lot of years, and we're not having as good efficacy as we had in the past. And just wanted to talk about those, and especially, our product Diflex. Definitely, as you look at efficacy charts of water hemp control post-emerge in corn, you basically have the Group 27 HPPD herbicides, or you have dicamba, and we talk about Diflex here. And there's been a lot of Diflex used over the last couple of years in late applications and rescue treatments, and it'd really be nice to move that up into just putting it in the tank at the beginning instead of using it so much as a rescue treatment. And I guess I didn't have a slide in here, but I think the first person I heard use this phrase, we're starting to use a lot more Liberty on corn. And Jason Anderson is the one who I think crafted this, but be smart when spraying Liberty. So Smart Stacks Pro, carry the Liberty tolerance. Anything else within the DEKALB lineup is not Liberty tolerant. So there is a lot more Liberty being put on corn. But I wanted to hit on a few things with Diflex, going into the tank. Obviously has that safener we talked about earlier. Really good control across a wide range of weeds, but and able to be sprayed up to V10 or 36-inch tall corn. Now, I wouldn't advise that. As we have been using more and more dicamba in corn, I think we have forgotten how we used to use dicamba way back in the marksman days. It was kind of a row and go. And now I feel like we are spraying a lot of corn, pretty big corn. And I have a video coming up showing, what that can run problems into later. Now, this says application rate 6 to 16. We'd really like to see 10 to 12, not those lower rates. So, and here's application timing, compared to with that foliar and root safening abilities with Diflex with that cyprosulfamide. You have a pre-emergence label up through V10, where, a competitive product like Status, you're basically V2 to V8. And here's some pictures that were taken 4 days after application. So your far left is going to be your Lotus at 3 ounces with 8 ounces of Diflex, and you just can see crop response, very little. Here's Diflex alone 4 days after application with some COC in both of them, and then comparing that to a product like Clarity without the safener and the crop response you will see 4 days after application. Excuse me. Let's see if my video is going to work here. I can't get it to go. So this was a field a couple years ago that was sprayed with Rifle, basically a unsafened dicamba product. And then 2 days later, this is pretty big corn as well. So if you look at these unsafened products, you're talking V5, V6, 8-inch tall corn, which you can see in this photo here that we were on the cusp of pretty big corn when we sprayed this. And then 2 days later, we received a 26-mile-an-hour sustained winds with 40-mile-per-hour gusts, and really kind of snapped that corn off right at the soil surface. And the reason I want to bring this up, not to scare anybody, but out with some growers yesterday, had some pretty big corn, started talking to them about post applications of corn. They're thinking, we're 2 weeks off from spraying this corn. Well, asked them what their plan was. They're going to spray Rifle. And then on top of that, they have some 10363, 10769, our new launch class last year, that both have a caution for growth regulators. Now, again, I think we've talked about this over and over throughout the fall and this winter that, these caution products, it's not that we can't spray dicamba on it, but we just have to be on the front side. And so I just wanted to call that out, at least a couple conversations I had yesterday with a couple growers that they were both using unsafe and dicamba. Both had like V3 corn, and we're not planning on spraying that corn for a little while. So they really need to, once it's fit, get out there and hit that and hopefully switch to Diflex. But just wanted to call that out because we are on the cusp of spraying a lot of corn.
Yeah, great point, Dustin. And yeah, when I was talking GDUs, I didn't mention 85 GDUs per new leaf, which right now we're not accumulating too many, but we know once we get going here with heat, that's once every 3 days. So it changes rapidly, especially once we get past this ugly corn phase when we transition into the nodal roots from the seed. And that's going to be taking place for a lot of fields over this next few days. And so get past that, then we're just putting leaves on very rapidly. So we've got to be ready for this corn to take off and be timely with our post sprays.
Oh, here, then my photo or my video finally went through, but you can see, and obviously we get a lot of wind in Northwest Iowa, and just better to be safe than sorry.
Yeah, I agree. Better to be safe than sorry. We've talked a lot today and in previous newsletters and previous weeks that we have a lot of yield potential out here in our corn. Even the fields that potentially have reduced stands, when these early planting dates, we're still talking 95, 96, 97% of yield. So when guys, I think that it's going to be important on stuff like post spraying, doing it right, keeping that in the forefront of our mind of, guys, we have not really given up that much yield. We want to do things right. We want to keep that yield potential in every action that we do. And one of the things that we also want to highlight is with these storms, with the situations, the wind, everything that we've been dealing with this year, one of those things that we want to do right and save some of that yield potential is talk about early fungicide applications. We've had a lot of sandblasting. We've had a lot of very heavy downpours, soil splashing, soil movement and running. I know there's been just a lot of washing in our hills to the south. So I think that these growers, we should have the talk when we're going across for post spray. Are these fields great candidates for early season fungicide applications? So these early season fungicide applications, we're already going across, so we're not talking about an application cost. We're wanting to really protect from some of those key diseases like anthracnose, physoderma, things that like some potentially open wounds. They're going to come in anyway through stomata and stuff like that. But from splashing, from soil movement in all of these very strong storms that we've had. So the early fungicide applications, we protect those lower leaves, we reduce the risks of those soil-borne diseases, and just kind of keep that plant as healthy as we can moving forward through the rest of the season. Dustin, could you move it forward? It didn't let me move it.
Yep.
So our fungicide rates are going to be lower, and part of that reason is because of how the plant is structured when it's little. It feels like we're hitting some bare dirt, right? But we're actually hitting a much larger percent of the plant at this size. So we're able to reduce some of those rates, and obviously the plant is smaller. So when you're talking to guys about that an additional fungicide pass, they're going to go and jump to their brain what they're going to pay at tassel time, right? That's not the same conversation we're having. So this is a great slide. We'll send these out to have that conversation with your grower of, we're going to be running 4 to 6 ounces of Delaro or Delaro Complete at that V4 to V7 timeframe. So when you're doing your post pass, so like we said, it's a reduced rate. We have no additional cost, but we're still getting optimization. As you can see here, our studies show that we have a 40% increase, like concentration on a leaf, even though it's so small compared to those tassel time applications. So we're getting some good systemic health. We're getting that protection moving forward and saving that yield potential that we really do still have in the field. Dustin, if you could move forward one more slide. So again, we're just going to talk some of those diseases that live in our residue. Anthracnose, gray leaf spot. I really think anthracnose potentially could have moved around with some of the storms that we've been seeing and some really beat up corn, like the picture that we had earlier from Dustin. This is not going to protect the leaves that develop after application, but we're giving a solid foundation for yield, right? We're doing all of those correct steps. We want to get out there in a timely fashion and plant correctly. We want to maintain our weeds, keep them down. We want our plant to be healthy during the month of June. And we're just adding each of those management steps on to have that highest yield potential when it comes to harvest time. So, and again, we're going to manage that free ride. So this is our one of my last items. With all this additional rain and cool weather, I know that when we get down into the south, in our hills, in our reduced tillage, this is probably some good conditions for slugs. And I know not everybody sees these. These can be very localized. We have a pocket in southern Sac County and northern Crawford County. I know that there's a pocket south of Coon Rapids. Fields of heavy residue. If you're going to be in a field, if you're checking for slugs, or no-till fields, reduced till fields, especially fields that are replanted after hail or crusting or potentially frost and are smaller, or fields that were planted poorly. We maybe have an open furrow for those slugs to just go down a buffet line. And you're going to see plants that look like this picture here. They have some strange bite marks. They'll have it on the cotyledons, on also the hypocotyl, look like Swiss cheese almost. There's some chunks taken out of it. And it's really important to dig down into that residue and find these suckers. I have never once walked into a field and just seen them with my eyes. Right. I've been on multiple calls where people go, well, there's got to be a herbicide problem. And nobody had kind of gotten on a knee, checked through that residue to see these suckers. And this is like the biggest slug that I've ever seen. Thankfully, they don't really get bigger than this. But they do take some looking. They are not managed by insecticide. They're not an insect, right? So managing that residue, tillage, some really good success with solid row cleaners in some of these fields, and also some big differences in things like baling. Even taking the residue off some of these hillside or these high pressure areas can help reduce these slugs in future years. They tend to be in the same spot year over year. So if you're having some areas that have reduced stands and you're like, what's going on here again, dig through that residue, see if you can find these guys, give us a call and we can talk through it. But I just wanted to let you guys know that this cool down we've had could be a potential for some of these uglies to show up. They're not fun to handle, but that's all I have on slugs, Dustin.
Hey, before we're off the topic of fungicides, Nora, there is a question in the chat from Brad as far as the ROI.
I think it depends on the field, guys, and you guys can chime in, but we want to make sure that we have fields. Higher ROIs to me would be fields where we know we have these problems, right? We know we've had anthracnose in the past, probably corn on corn fields, high residue fields that are having these issues of high rainfall, splashing soil. You know, if you're in an area that has not gotten your corn beat up or is being impacted by something else, maybe sidewall compaction or severely reduced stands, some other limiter that might reduce the ROI on that V5 application. So there's a little bit of nuance there, but when we're going for plant health in some of these areas that have the diseases that we're targeting, I think the ROI is there. It does not replace a VT application. Right. This is in addition to, but it is not going to fix some additional problem or somebody who's not maintaining their weeds, things like that. I'm not sure what situations where you've kind of gone back and forth, but that would be my say on it. Dustin or Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is this. I mean, if you look at any of the data between V5 and VT, VT has always provided the highest ROI, highest yield, highest return to the grower. So this would be in addition. I mean, if you're going to pick one or the other, it'd still keep the tassel time. But, you know, with the amount of dirt we've had blowing around, tattered up leaves, being able to run a little bit reduced rate to keep that cost down to provide maybe a more positive ROI, it is something to think about.
Yeah, some of the data we shared at the post-harvest kickoff meetings, mainly out of Illinois, but it was showing actually a pretty good ROI from the V5 applications with the VT applications. It was at high yield environments, like Nora mentioned, and it was in some fields that typically have Fusarium crown rot. So If I'm going to target one field, or if I'm going to at least do a trial in a field, I would target high yield environments, heavier soil, obviously where you've had the weather conditions for it. And then also if there's been a history of crown rot, those would be the best opportunities in my mind for a ROI.
Mm-hmm.
So wrapping up here on the 10769 as far as a spotlight product, and this is a key one to spotlight. This one was new last year. This year we've got it out in field situations, and I really like how it's emerged. It's been one of the best out of the ground. Right there with actually the one behind me, 100-53. That's a brand new product, but agronomically 10769 is also very solid, especially with a one for stalk strength. We don't give out too many ones. And disease package, really it's got the whole gamut working for it. So not too many weaknesses in this product, and it was very solid yield wise. So we're ramping it up. This year we ramped it up as hard as we could with the seed stock we had available. This next year we've definitely forecasted more. So it's going to be a key one in the lineup, I think, really for all three of our territories.
And that brings us to the final slide. If I can advance it. No, thank you, everybody. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for the engagement and being on today. At least the sun's shining. Not that warm today, but looks like we're going to warm up, come through the weekend. And I think that's the biggest thing that I can think of, especially with some conversations I've had this week, is just getting guys ready to post-spray corn and have that conversation about, their plans, and especially the advantages of using a safe and dicamba product like Diflex in the tank and not taking the risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to follow up, and Brad made a good point in the chat there. As far as if they're doing two applications, looking at that, the VT, and then also maybe an R3 application 21 days after. And if I was in last year's situation and we had southern rust as our major disease, no question about it. Those two applications post tassel would be the best ROI. So it's I guess all goes into the management decisions that you're helping your growers make, and there's no clear-cut decisions. Some are on board already because they saw a return on the two applications post tassel. Some are, no matter what, they're planning on that one application, and this gives another chance at a less cost to have that second application early in the season.
There is no more questions. Everybody, thank you again, and have a great day.
Yep. Thanks everyone for being on.